really appreciate it. And if you have some questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Can I just ask you to expand on the Medicaid, Medicare that you mentioned, how it differs from what we're currently doing?
Right now, for example, if you go to the hospital and you've got Medicare coverage, you pay a deductible, and then the billing is run through the federal government, essentially, by the hospitals, dealing with the federal government, dealing with all sorts of rules and regulations about reimbursement. There are laws that prevent doctors from working with hospitals and so forth in ways that you would think might actually make sense. Of course, it may not make sense for people in Washington. So there's really a very significant regulatory maze right now. I think the state of New Hampshire can act as a third-party administrator so that the hospitals send the bills, send their billing to the state officials, people we know and can control, and they can figure out the best way to reimburse, like an insurance company does. That will create more opportunity, more competition. We also need to open up our insurance marketplace so more insurers are able to compete in this marketplace. We do it to ourselves in New Hampshire by making it very difficult.
Right, so, and this was from Jean Shaheen, right? The
that's right, back in the 90s, and when she was a state senator. So there's a lot we can do in New Hampshire, but the states, and this is an initiative that's been started in some of the southern states to actually go this route that I'm talking about, and that is to say to the federal government, block grant, you can come up with a pretty reasonable estimate of what it will cost to provide medical services to the elderly population, for example, in a state like New Hampshire. You know how many people are eligible, you know how many people, what their acuity is generally, you know what the past history is. And to say, we're going to block grant this money to you. You figure out the best way to provide coverage to those citizens. And the oversight of the federal government should be at a high level and should be limited. We can deal with it. We might contract with an insurance company and act as that third-party administrator, but we need more control over this. And the same thing is true about education dollars. So, come on in. Welcome. We'll have more to talk about with that. By the way, one thing I always want to say when I talk about running for governor, I pledge, I'll issue another Ovid's Oath. It'll be Ovid's Oath version 2 for the state of New Hampshire. But one of the pledges is certainly, if the legislature ever passes a broad-based tax, sales or income tax, I pledge to veto that tax. And I think it's important that the business community and the financial markets know that in Ovid for governor, there's a commitment to make sure that we do not have a broad-based tax in the state that only allows for greater growth of government, takes more money out of our citizens' pockets, and continues to sort of put constraints on the government's growth now, and by not having one of those broad-based taxes. That's an important concept to continue to advocate, even if we don't think we'll see one from our legislature. You just never know what the pressures are like. Yes.
A few months ago, when we were chatting, you had just finished lunch with Jed Bradley and John Stevens. So, have you gotten a consensus among your potential
strategists?
Good shot.
That's a very good question. I did reach out to both John Stevens and Jed Bradley. Jed Bradley has decided not to run for governor, and I hope I can earn his support. John Stevens was our nominee the last cycle. Right. He deserves all the time in the world that he needs or wants to make a decision for himself. He said he does not want to decide this issue until after the presidential primary is over. Okay. I understand that. He also understands that I'm working really hard to put together the best team possible early on that can help throughout the whole course of the campaign. So my hope is that he and I can work together on one campaign.
Well, he brings a lot to the party, but I think he brings a lot as an advisor or as a department head, because he knows so much about the financing of states and state governments.
He's really been a resource to a lot of states, and he's learned a lot about this a niche area, which is Medicaid financing and so forth, and he can be a tremendous value. And there are other people out there who are thinking about running. I say, let's work together, okay? Because there's a lot we need to do together. We're really on the same page.
Well, we noticed that a certain Mr. Smith is no longer working at Cornerstone.
Well, we'll see where that brings.
Why don't you explain it, as you have at other places, about how you intend to bring new businesses to the state of New Hampshire?
Yeah.
Well, there are a number of things we need to be doing. First of all, we don't have an economic development plan in New Hampshire, believe it or not. We really have a sort of siloed approach. We need to have a comprehensive look at what our resources are in New Hampshire in terms of in infrastructure resources, what kind of businesses would be best located in what areas, and to proactively recruit business from other parts of the state, and to make sure we're connected with our existing businesses. We ought to have a regulatory system that makes it a one-stop shopping for new businesses to form. Call one number, one office, get a case manager assigned to you who will take care of contacting the Department of Labor, Secretary of State's office, Environmental Services, whoever it is that needs to be contacted. That one person is your advocate as you sign up to become part of the business climate in New Hampshire. And then after that, what we need to do is make sure that we have the best regulatory structure. So we need to look at our tax structure, make sure that business profits taxes are high. We need to make sure that the structure we have there is not discouraging businesses from staying. You know, in the main, we still have a very favorable tax climate, but we do things to ourselves. We create a penalty on businesses for borrowing money in order to keep employees on, in terms of the BET tax. So there's some things we have to look at from the tax point of view. But in the end, it's about being smart and networking with the right people to bring them in and let them know that there are good workers here, that we have a great climate in which to live and which to have a business. And then lastly, we need to make sure that people know that we have the resources, the human resources available. And one of the things I want to do is partner with education and business to come up with what I would call a learn-to-earn program. And that is to assess the employment needs of our existing businesses, BAE, large employers, small ones, and find out what is expected in terms of the number of engineers we'll need and accountants and whatever, and then try to have business partner with our technical schools, our community colleges, and then our four-year colleges, both private and public, and find those schools that are willing to commit, all right, that we're going to create a scholarship program with the help of the private sector and recruit students who are going to commit to working in New Hampshire in those jobs, so that at the end of the process, they can graduate with a commitment they're going to be able to go into BAE or some other workforce in New Hampshire and stay in New Hampshire. We have a drain of talent because we have wonderful people coming here and then they leave. They leave to go other places, and we're not making, I think, a concerted enough effort to work with education to try to find ways of keeping our students here. If you accept the scholarship under this program, you've got to commit to stay in New Hampshire for a certain period of time.
Oh, but one more. Would you speak a little bit about the retirement system and what a nemesis that is for our state, please?
It is a huge nemesis. You know, the state, unlike most of the private businesses anymore, still has what's called a defined benefit plan. And the defined benefit plan commits to a certain level of compensation after you retire, regardless of the performance of the stock market or investments and so forth. We need to convert from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan. And our employees, we need to have a dialogue with them to understand that we need to go a way that will allow for the retirement system to function over the long haul. Everybody's in this together. We've got to all make some sacrifices. And that's not a radical idea. That is what everyone else is doing. And there's a way to do this, and we'll get that done. That is a very important piece, and I thank you for asking that. We're like one of the worst states in terms of the liabilities, unfunded liabilities we carry through the retirement program. We've got a lot of things in that program that are actually very cost drivers. So we've started the work there, and we need to continue to work on the retirement system.
Well, there's a big chunk being passed down to the towns, I believe.
Well, there is now. Yeah, there has been, although
larger, I think now. It's like 30% or something.
I don't know if it's that high, Joe.
It was incredible.
But that was poor decisions by past administrations, where the state said, "Oh, we'll give the towns a little boost."
Yeah. Well, that's understandable. I think the problem that we have is like the co-op system here in town. They're not even talking about it yet, which is really foolish. But they need to get on it.
You know, and that's the other thing. We need to also have leaders at the local level. Cities and towns need to have people who are willing to fight the bureaucracy locally, and that puts the burden on us. But you know what? This is our call. This was our challenge of our generation. We can be the greatest generation if we deal with these issues ourselves. And I must say, as an American, I'd rather be dealing with these issues than having to wear the uniform and go abroad. And I'm so grateful for the men and women who are willing to do that. But the challenge to save America now is right here at home, because we have put ourselves in a position of great vulnerability. China holds half of our foreign debt, and we continue to borrow at a rate that's going to collapse this country. And you know it, and I know it. And so I say to people, if you're running for office and you don't think your hair's on fire, there's something wrong with you. This is a crisis we're in, and that's why I'm running hard, and I'm going to continue to run. It's a marathon, but I'm going to have a good clip all the way until next year, and then we serve.
I actually have three, one at a time or all in a group.
One at a time.
One at a time.
Okay, the first one, along with God's help and Republican good conservatives in the State House, New Hampshire has been blessed with a parental notification law. Do you think, when you're the governor in about 15 months from now, that a parental consent law is something that is doable in the state?
It's hard to know. I think it probably is. It depends on who is in the legislature. And there are a number of things we need to be dealing with that I think, again, creates an environment in New Hampshire that's pro-family, that affirms people, and that may be one of them that will come down the pike. I think, though, that the primary focus of our administration and our legislature will continue to be on reforming state government, business issues, and getting our state on the right track when it comes to economic opportunities down the road. But those social issues are also very important.
The online, as we snoop around, everybody knows that I'm all over the illegal immigration thing. Everybody knows this. It's said that 12 Americans a day are killed by persons who are in the country illegally. With the Ovide administration, how would you deal with this situation to help make sure that New Hampshire citizens are safe?
Well, we need to work with the federal government and federal law enforcement to enforce our immigration laws. We've seen the state of Arizona undertake some of its own initiatives. And listen, I say we have to start at home to protect ourselves and our citizens, not rely on the federal government. And so whatever it would take to work collaboratively with the federal government, but to step in when we need to if we find that there are illegal immigrants who are in our communities who don't belong there, who need to re-enter legally, then we need to work with the federal government to make sure that that's handled. And we need to empower people and discourage employers from employing illegal immigrants. I think it's a human tragedy that we would allow this. We're forcing citizens to remain in the shadows of our society in an undocumented way, rather than trying to be assimilated as Americans. There is a purpose and a place for immigration. We're all sons and daughters of immigrants, right? Yeah. But we need to do it in an orderly fashion, and we're not. And that's an important societal issue. It's a human rights issue. And it's contrary to human rights, in the sense of human rights, to just simply turn a blind eye and let people live in the shadows of our society without a reasonable expectation that they can become citizens in the right way. Third question.
This one is more of an Armageddon type of a question.
Okay, give me an easy one.
I'll save the easiest for last.
Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah.
There were law-abiding citizens that were required to turn in their guns. There's a lot of us that are pretty, I forget which one of the founding fathers said it, but he basically said there's a real problem when the citizens are afraid of the government. You're better off having the government afraid of the citizens.
I think Thomas Jefferson said something.
I thought it was too. I
Yeah.
thought it was. I thought it might have been Madison, but I was leaning towards Jefferson. Thank you. If next year, next November, New Hampshire will be voting conservative. If the other 56 states
You're watching too much TV.
if they decide to all take an LSD trip at the same time, another mistake, and something bad happened in the country, and someone who sticks his chin out like Mussolini decides that we're going to have martial law and confiscate guns or something like that, what would be the response? from the governor of New Hampshire.
Yeah, we need to protect our citizens' rights, and the right to bear arms is a New Hampshire right as well as it is a federal right, and there's no place for that. But let's hope that cooler heads will prevail on any of these issues, that we can work together for the common purpose. I think whether you're even for those of our friends who are Democrats and don't necessarily subscribe to what we consider to be the conservative principles, even with them, the things that could unite us as Americans, I think, outweighs the things that divide us. We all begin with the proposition that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. They agree with that. And that government has its power from the consent of the governed. They agree with that. That's what's radical about America. Now, they turn over way too much power to the government, put way too much faith in the government. We put our faith in people. And we need to try to be optimistic about restoring the faith people should have in themselves. Over themselves and their families, their communities, not turn it over to government. And that's a fundamental paradigm shift. Can I have a little bottle of water, please?
I've got a question for you.
I can feel my voice.
Regarding special education, it seems that special education is expanding rapidly in communities. I look at my community. They're advertising, I don't know if it's every week, to increase the number of students that are declared special education needs so that they can get more money. We're looking at now a $500,000 increase in the budget next year for a small town because they've expanded special education, and there's always the claim from the local officials, we can't do anything, our hands are tied. So what can the state do to kind of some common sense things, like the transportation budgets, we're paying people $1 a mile to transport their own kids to a school. Yeah. I mean, there has to be some help from the state so that these people can't run roughshod over us.
There is actually some help from the state. It's called catastrophic aid. It's sort of like an insurance program that the state has set up. But let's step back for a second. The federal government enacted the IDEA, which is a special education law in 1975, with a promise that it would pay 50 cents on the dollar of special education costs. And it never has even come close to meeting its obligation. How about a lawsuit against the federal government on that? Yeah. And trying to collect for back payments. I mean, we need to be assertive with the federal government. You cannot break your promise, Uncle Sam, if you make a promise to the states and the people. Secondly, we overregulate special education, and we've done it to ourselves there. So we need to look at really how it is that we make these decisions and make more efficient and better decisions. Now, we're not going to abandon our disabled population. I don't think anybody in this room would support that. But there's a lot of ways to make it more efficient and less costly. Outsourcing is not a bad word at all. What about contracting with Easter Seals, for example, private entity? That's what happens when you talk all day. and having them help to provide some of the services. They can do it more inexpensively. A lot of communities will hire like speech pathologists almost full time for a very light caseload, as opposed to having someone like an Easter Seals or other private organization, charitable organization that has the ability to hire people, but they have a much larger caseload because they work with various districts. There's a lot of opportunity there that we're not taking advantage of, and largely because of bureaucracy is sort of wringing out opportunity for our people, and we need to challenge that bureaucracy.
Well, the Easter Seal thing isn't a grandeur either.
No,
we had a situation here in town. We had the fire department or the police there every night.
Really?
In one of the homes that they had set up here in town, and they would have 6 or 8 people there, and there was something going on all the time.
Really?
It's a wonderful idea. I agree with you there. It'd be nice if somebody would take that up. But I wanted to follow up a little bit on what Al said about this special education. We're also in a situation now where our budget is going up. This is budget season, as you know, and these are coming forward now. I think we have. They're asking for $500,000 for English as a second language in our town here. I think maybe that's another thing we need to push for. That English is our
Yes. English should be the official language.
Yeah.
I agree, and so that's something else to look at because this special ed thing it's bigger and bigger. It's a good hiring block.
Yeah.
In Nashville, we pay $250 a day for a bus to transport one child.
Yeah.
And if that child is sick and stays home, we
You
still pay $250 for the
right.
bus driver to stay home. Drives me wild.
Right. I can see that.
We just can't afford to do it. If we could afford it, that would be different, but we can't.
But you can't get out of it either, Sandra.
No, I well know.
Exactly. I mean, we have one here. We have one here that's $150,000 a year transportation.
Little nullification required.
Yeah, it's difficult. It really is difficult. You don't know what to say. I mean, but it is what it is, unfortunately. And I think too, though, I talk to our people that run our town a lot about. I think we ask too much. We're always doing things based upon what some other government agency will do for us. We always had here in town that it's time to build the school because times are bad, contractors need work, and the state will give us 40% of what we're gonna use. And the state says, well, that's okay, we'll send it out because the federal government will send us 50% and we'll make 10. And now the federal government has run out. That's good socialism, isn't it? Yeah. The federal government ran out of money and there's no more to pass down, so we're all going, hello.
That's right.
We need to do our own. If you can't do it yourself, don't do it.
There you go. That's why we have to rely on ourselves more than we've ever done.
Absolutely.
At least in the last 50 years or so.
I didn't mean to pontificate.
I have a question. Since Governor Lynch is in running, where do you think his most vulnerable points would have been if you had to run against him?
Isn't that what you say? Yes.
And I had one other wisecrack to make. If anybody starts to declare martial law around here, I suggest we all change our name to Marshall. But where does the highlights of the list? He's so vulnerable, I know that, but where would you have hit him on the hardest?
I think most people recognize that the governor was not a leader in Concord. I mean, he's not a leader. He doesn't really articulate an agenda that he wants to advance. He reacts too much. So he's allowed too much spending to take place in Concord, especially when the Democrats were in charge. He's allowed bureaucracy to run amok. I mean, we would have looked at the record. You have to take responsibility for your administration. Even if some of the people running the departments or in the state government were appointed by prior governors, you've got to be responsible. FRM was a huge scandal in our state, and it occurred under his watch. I mean, there were a lot of things we were going to be able to point to, but right now we don't need to. The good news is, and this is good news, we don't have to look in the rearview mirror anymore and to try to get someone fired. That's what John Stephen had to deal with and prior Republican nominees. They were running against someone trying to encourage the people of New Hampshire to fire them. What we can say to the people of New Hampshire is, this is what we want to do, and bring them to us and chart an agenda that I think makes sense for people. And that's what we're going to be doing here over the next few months, is rolling out a comprehensive plan that makes sense for business, for families, and for the quality of life here in New Hampshire, so that we're second to none. I'm not satisfied being the best in New England. I want to be the best in the country. And by the way, when it comes to education, I'm not satisfied that we're maybe the best state in the country in terms of student performance, because our country is at the bottom of industrialized nations. I want our state to compete with those rest of the score results from other states, other countries around the world.
We want to be better than Indonesia.
Absolutely we do. Absolutely we do. And then we need to get back to what it is we're supposed to be doing as a people. And there's a great opportunity, I think, to do it now. There's something happening in America. We're realizing we have to take responsibility for ourselves, that we have to be vigilant as individuals. And the Tea Party movement, the 9/12 movement, Occupy New Hampshire movement, that's a different story. I don't know what they're about. But, the sort of the resurgence of the Constitution, all of these things people are starting to take ownership in. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. We have to be responsible and hold the government accountable. By the way, you may remember that during this last election I ran in, a little Senate race of ours, I used to carry the Constitution of of the United States and the Declaration of Independence. And now I'm carrying that plus the Constitution of New Hampshire. And I'm reading that and studying the New Hampshire Constitution. Because this is the charter between the people and state government. And this has to be honored. It is not an historic document any more than this is. These are real enforceable compacts between the people, and in this case the states, and the federal government. And this is the compact between the citizens of New Hampshire and their government. And I honor that. I respect it, and I want to enforce it within the context of the state constitution.
And it's one of the strongest in the country.
And it's a very good, yes it is, in terms of the particularly personal rights that are recognized here as respected and enforced. Yes?
Well, that's what, you held up those constitutions. It reminds me, is there any way we could have that brought into the schools to be taught?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Mike's done a job.
Absolutely.
And the law schools. I went to law school. You know how we learned the Constitution? No one ever asked us to read it. We read case law about it. Mm-hmm. And so you get to the source documents and really understand it in context, and start to read, the Federalist Papers and some of the original thinking. It's marvelous. It's amazing what those people were inspired to do, and the thinking they went into it. And we've taken so much for granted. The other thing that's interesting. You know that The Wealth of Nations, which Adam Smith wrote as the sort of the seminal work on capitalism, was published in 1776. Something was happening at least in the Western civilization, that reached our shores that sort of enlightened our people to think big thoughts. And we are the beneficiaries of that.
And our founders understood that, and they studied Burke and they studied Adam Smith.
They did.
And furthermore, our founders understood human nature and its frailties and wrote a constitution to guard against it. The Democrats that we have today, on the other hand, believe that they can change human nature, and that is why they are doomed to fail.
I think that, but also I think there's something about human beings that we want to help, right? We want to be of help to others. And I think the thinking of the Democrats and progressives is government is the way to help. It is not the way to help most of the time. It has a limited role to play. And it has a role to play in terms of establishing a safety net for the most vulnerable in our society. We've allowed that to happen, and we've encouraged that. But that's a limited role. This expansive role, especially of turning over to the federal government, like health care. That's what we're doing. I mean, where does that come from? And I think there's a sense that somehow bigger is better, and it's not.
Too big to fail.
Right, and too big to fail is not true either. Yes, Jay.
I just had a couple of comments to this gentleman here. I'm a selectman in my town. I'm a second-term selectman. I think it's our duty to run for those offices and to change things that way. Because no matter how hard we work without being in an official position, it's very difficult to change those things. And if we are going to support Ovid as a governor, he needs to know that he has strong people in the community doing what's important to change that community. Our school budget, 70% of my taxes go to our school budget. And it's probably not any different in your community. But unless you get on the school board, unless you take the time to do those things, it's not going to change. I'm a grassroots person. Ovid knows that. Some of you ask me if I'm with this campaign. I like to think I am. But I'm doing this at this point because it's not about what we say. It's about our actions and our deeds. That's what's important. I am a area vice chair for the GOP. Having stepped up to do this, I will need to resign once it's the primary, once we have somebody else in, but I have committed to Ovid to do that with no assurance that I'm going to be right, exactly, that I'm going to be running his campaign or working on it, but that doesn't matter to me because it's all about getting the right person for governor. Because no matter how hard our state reps work and our senators work, if we don't have that corner office, we've not achieved our goal. So I'd like to thank Ovid for stepping up to do this and for all of you for attending tonight. And, we're here to help, and I think we need to work together. You need to pass the word on to your fellow citizens of the town to let them know that they need to step up, that's the important thing, because no matter how hard we work, if we're not in a position to make that final decision or to make that vote, we're not going to help any at all. So,
and one of the first things you can do to help me is to send a link to our website to your friends and family, or connect contacts in the area in the state of New Hampshire. So it's Friends of Ovide, OVIDE. Don't forget the E. 2010.com.
And one last thing, although it's difficult for someone campaigning to ask for donations, I will do it. We need to have the support of you as much or as little as you can give at any time, and we need that support in order to move forward. You're going to have a lot of people. This is a big machine on the other side, and we don't have that in the GOP. The most we've ever raised has been about $250,000 as a state GOP. The Democrats typically raise over $800,000 a year. Yeah. So that's what we're faced with. We run lean and mean. We believe in small government and lower taxes. And unfortunately, that passes on to our state committee as well. We do it that way. So.
How much do you think you need to? What kind of money are you looking for? It's big money, isn't it?
Yes. It is big money. And we're going to do our level best to raise as much as we can, and then do what I've always done, and that's to get the best result with the investment that people make. Right now, this is the best leverage you can ever make on a campaign. We don't have any paid staff. We've got a website and a lot of volunteer energy right now. And so I like to try to raise as much money to develop a war chest, so that as we roll out our campaign and start buying signs and doing all the things you need to do to start to get the word out, we're in a position to do that and then to advertise. Somebody said to me the other day, Ovide, I loved your campaign commercials, and we were waiting for U.S. Senate. I said, stop right there. One commercial. That's all I had. Don't tell me about commercials. And if you saw it, you probably were watching TV between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Because we didn't have a lot of money to put up any commercials. And yet, look at what we were able to do with the help of a lot of people in this room.
So did he spend, do we know how much Lynch spent last year?
Well, Lynch,
not last year, but
last year he actually loaned his own campaign about $800,000. He must have spent as a campaign a couple million anyways, and he didn't have any primary ahead of him. So whatever we don't have to spend on the primary is going to mean we'll have more resources left in the general election. And I know that our general election cycle is very short in New Hampshire. You win on September 10th, let's say, and 2 months later, it's the general election. Yeah. If you are out of money because you've had a contested primary and you haven't raised enough, or you've had to spend it all, it takes time to get that money back in. And so money is important, and we're not going to make that mistake. We're going to be ready to go right after the primary and go full tilt into the general election, so people know what the choices are. God bless you. God bless America. God bless the great state of New Hampshire. Thank you.
Ovide, I have one more.